Alright, episode 4 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Season 2 has dropped on Amazon Prime Video. So now let's talk about it with spoilers, so that is a spoiler warning. If you have not yet watched this episode and you're planning on it, then fly away because I will be talking about what happens in this episode in detail. If you have watched it or you don't care, then you're good. Alright, let's get started. I'm gonna start off with the wizard, actually, because his arc is the one that leads to the namesake of this episode, which is Eldest. So last we left off with him, he created that sandstorm that sent Nori and Poppy flying away to get rid of those bad guys that were trying to get them. So now the wizard searches for his friends, and he comes across this hermit. And well, he seems to be a merry fellow. That's right, Tom Bombadil has finally entered the chat. Played by Rory Kinnear, who's Tanner in James Bond. Wow, talk about acting range. And yeah, I really like this character. And I'll preface this by saying that this really is my introduction to this character. I've heard of him, of course, but I've never read any of the books, so I don't know much about him in official lore, but I like this iteration. I mean, he starts out pretty weird, like there's something off about him, which there is, but he turns out to be alright. He has magic powers, kind of like a wizard, but I don't think he is a wizard, or at least I don't think he's an E-Star. He's something else. I don't know what. He's just Tom Bombadil, and he's older than the hills. I guess he's been around for a very long time, like since the very beginning, according to him anyway. Which yeah, then brought up in my head the question that the wizard eventually asked him. If he's been around for so long, then why doesn't he fight? To which he just answers, that's just not my thing. Tom is a wanderer, not a warrior. I was like, alright, so he's essentially a hippie, an immortal hippie. That's actually a really cool concept. He is the eldest. He's basically an eternal, and he just kind of wanders the world to the beat of his own drum. That's awesome. I love that. And as it turns out, I guess the wizard was meant to find him for some reason. Tom does tell him that his task is to face Sauron and this dark wizard, Kieran Hines. Maybe Tom's gonna help our wizard out, teach him a thing or two. That's really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes. I really like it. So meanwhile, with Nori and Poppy, they find themselves picked up by another civilization living out here in the desert, the Stoors. Yeah, this other group of halflings living in what looks like a nicer version of the Lars homestead. Yeah, that's not a bad setup they got going on, with their leader also acting pretty weird. In fact, this episode is pretty weird just in general. A lot of strange stuff going on here. But yeah, the way she talks, she's all like, the only halflings we know around these parts are Stoors. I was like, why are you talking like that? But apparently these guys are where the Harfoots originally came from. We do get some backstory here. We learned that one of their kind with the last name Burrows went off in search of this paradise sounding place. Burrows was the last name of the leader of the Harfoots, Sadoc Burrows. We remember him. So we're like, oh, okay, we came from you. Sorry, we never found this Suzat, as you call it. We just kept wandering. We don't really have a home. But then that does shed some light on the whole Poppy's walking song that didn't make sense to me last week. Nori even mentioned it. I was like, okay, so yeah, now that makes sense. Poppy did say she was going through Sadoc's old books to find it, so that's why that song was in there, because it came from this place. Because his ancestors came from this place. Okay, now I get it. So I wasn't supposed to understand last week. Alright, way to play me, show. That's clever. And so that's where we leave them. Jumping over to Arondir and Isildur and Estrid and all them, they're searching for Theo because last we saw him, he was snatched up by something in the Dark Forest. Yeah, it's the Ents, so that's what we're doing. Although, Estrid was found out pretty quickly. Arondir just snitches her out. He says he saw that mark on the back of her neck, but I don't remember seeing him see that. Maybe I missed it somewhere. Point is, she's busted. So now she's their prisoner in cuffs. I will say, I'm not buying the romance drama, whatever that is, between Isildur and Estrid. Or it's not that I'm not buying it, it's rather just I don't need it. It seemed almost like a high school-ish romance drama bullshit. Like, he's all doing this shit, and I was sitting there like, alright, I get it. This attractive guy and this attractive girl, they'll gravitate towards each other. And then later on, when everyone else is rescued, this other guy's like, Estrid, and Isildur's like, oh man, that's as cliche as it gets. I don't know, I just hope that gets better. But yeah, man, we got some Ents in this episode, and they're pretty awesome. One of them's voiced by Jim Broadbent. I was like, Horse Slughorn? No way. And this scene is actually great. These two Ents, one of whom is actually female, first female Ent I've ever seen on screen. They're upset about an army of orcs that came storming through earlier, and Arondir swears to avenge all the little saplings that died at their hands. This forest will know peace. Yeah, I really like that. I like the writing in this scene, I love the tone, I like the score in there. It was really well done, I thought. Props to this scene. And so Arondir is gonna go after the orcs, and possibly Adar. And Theo's just gonna go back home, back to Pelargir. I wonder if that's the last we're gonna see of him this season. I don't know, could be. Meanwhile, with Galadriel and Elrond, remember they've been tasked to go to Eregion to check on Celebrimbor, and the antitrust between Elrond and Galadriel is still going strong. And so they get a crew together and they're off. So they wander into this dark forest and run across these zombie type things they call Barrow Wights, who are pretty gnarly looking, not gonna lie. I love what they're wearing, these like old tattered regal outfits. They look cool. But then again, I saw this whole skirmish with these zombies as pretty much just filler for these elves. It was just an incident that they came across on their way to the next plot point. Although we do assess that these Barrow Wights were awoken by Sauron, so there is evil at work here, and eventually the elves run across this orc pack. This is the orc pack that Arondir is now in search of. So they all get into a skirmish, and alright, this is weird. One of the elves gets plugged by an arrow, and Galadriel goes down to tend to him, and I was like, is it me or is Nenya glowing there? What's going on? And yeah, I guess it turns out Nenya has the power to heal. I didn't know that. Again, I don't know if that's actually official Tolkien lore that Nenya could do that, or if that was made up for this show. Either way, I find it interesting. And so Galadriel's like, alright, you guys go. I'm gonna fend off these orcs myself. Here, take the ring. She offers Nenya to Elrond, which I was surprised she would do that considering how attached she is to it. But then we learn later, Elrond says she's staying behind not to protect us, but to protect Nenya, the ring. Which actually, now that I think about it, it's pretty smart on her part. Cause she probably knows that she's gonna get captured. So yeah, might as well hand the ring off so the orcs don't get it. That's smart. And yeah, she's fighting off these orcs as much as she can. She's a total badass. I will admit, the Mary Sue thing is starting to get on my nerves a little bit. But then Adar comes and he's like, fancy meeting you here, Lady Galadriel. And that's where the episode ends. Alright, cool. So she is gonna get captured and put into a cage, and we're gonna find out what's going on with these orcs. Better stay tuned. My favorite quote from this episode came from Galadriel. Protecting that which is most fragile, most dear, is a task entrusted to all elves, and one that is not yet complete. She does go on from there, but that's the part I really liked. Because that's really cool. It kind of reminds me of with great power comes great responsibility. You know, these elves, they have their abilities, and they are obligated to use them for the good and protection of all living kind. That's awesome. So in the end, episode 4 of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2, I thought was a little strange. Things are just starting to get weird in an unexpected kind of way. At this point, I'm not really sure what to make of the whole thing. But we're halfway through the season now already. So from here, things should start amping up. So, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2, Episode 4, Eldest. Have you watched it yet? What are your thoughts on it? And what are your theories and predictions for next week? Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And of course, thank you for subscribing. Peace!